to join us. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending wherever you're tuning in from. My name is C. Anthony. I believe you all know me. Microsoft Learn Students Ambassador. Well, today we want to look at the Azure Web Apps and Containers. But before that, just want to remind you of our inclusive guidelines. Be sure to mute yourself if you're not speaking. And if you have any question, just raise your hand. If you can't speak, just utilize the chat as we move along. So today we want to look at Azure Web Apps and Containers. And the agenda for today, we want to have an overview of what web apps and containers are. We also want to look at how we can basically create and deploy web apps in Azure. We are also going to be looking at introduction to Docker and Kubernetes, just an introduction of that. We are not going to be going into deep of the concepts to do with Docker and Kubernetes, but that would come in later on if you guys want to maybe hold sessions for that individually, Docker and Kubernetes. If you want deep sessions for that, you can let me know so that we organize such sessions for Docker and Kubernetes. We are just going to look at the introductory part of that. So I don't expect much. Well, we're also going to be looking at how we can deploy a web app on Azure. So moving along. So when it comes to Azure Web Apps, like I said, think of it as a platform as service offering within Azure. And you essentially get your infrastructure management to be kind of abstracted from the from other resources. So it is essentially allows developers to solely focus on the application code and then the logic, and that results in faster development and reduced operation overhead. We're also going to be looking at that in deep detail. I just want us to have a brief overview of what Azure Web Apps are before we dive deep into the demonstration part of that. So moving along, the benefits for web applications, and that is basically deploying web applications on Azure. So you realize that there is rapid development. Remember earlier on, I told you when you're working in a group of a team, and that team consists of back end, web, front end, and probably the DevOps engineers. So when you're to utilize the Azure Web Apps as a service within Azure, you get a chance of rapid development. And how do you realize that you actually are developing web applications faster? That issue comes in a sense in such a way that you're utilizing several services within Azure, and those services are actually communicating to different components of your web application. You're not only running it within the premises, but since you're utilizing the cloud, you get a chance of probably doing auto scaling and also like development workflows that you. I would stretch the issue of DevOps integration as well. So when it comes to Azure, we have what is called Azure DevOps. So that essentially means that you can integrate in your GitHub workflows so that you can carry out the continuous integration and continuous development workflows. If you guys want us to also go deep into Azure DevOps, you can let me know in the WhatsApp group any kind of study session that you want us to hold. If there is any concept that you're not maybe understanding in deep detail, you can just let me know via WhatsApp group so that we can organize that. So, like I've told you, the Azure Web Apps, basically when you're using the Azure Web Applications, you get that sort of availability where you can actually integrate in the Azure DevOps integration. You can have the DevOps integrations within your workflows. So by Azure DevOps, I mean you can have the Azure bots, the Azure pipelines, and within Azure pipelines, you can have continuous integrations and continuous developments. By continuous integration, I mean, suppose your team, each individual within your team is working on a particular branch. So when someone wants to merge a particular branch within the main, we are going to be utilizing something called continuous integration. So if something is merged within the main branch, we shall have that sort of continuous integration. I don't know if that makes sense. Probably the other thing would be continuous development, right? So after having merged our code into the main branch, we can go ahead and we can have that sort of continuous deployment in that we are going to be utilizing the GitHub actions to basically serve our changes in real time. That may not be manual, but it is continuous integration, just like you're hearing the word continuous integration. We are integrating in our changes into the main branch, and then the continuous deployment is taking all those changes that have been made in the main branch, and then it is deploying it into the main into the cloud provider. Of course, here we are utilizing Azure, so I would urge you to utilize Azure. Hope you guys can see my slide. All right. So moving along, we want to look at how we can deploy a web application using the Azure user interface. So I'm just going to quickly switch to my browser and log into my Azure portal and demonstrate that. Let me stop sharing just for a minute. Yeah, so here essentially I'm in my Azure portal, and I want to deploy a web application, right? A web app. So it may be a static web application, or it may be um, an event-driven sort of application whereby you get to trigger some of your services based on the user's interaction via the web application that you've already deployed. But essentially, when it comes to, oops, I'm left with $20. So essentially, when it comes to the Azure portal, all you need to do is just type in Azure web app. So you realize that you have a few options. You have the Azure app services, and then the static web apps. Essentially, the static web apps basically help you to basically serve an application that is not going to be utilizing real-time integrations. You basically want to put something that is a little bit static, right? So that is what the static web apps does. So we also have other services, Azure Spring Apps, Azure Net Apps, and probably but essentially we want to deploy a static web app. So here I basically have a few static web apps that I came up with, and I want to create a new one. So I'm just going to click on create. Like before, you can you need to choose a particular subscription, or the subscription actually has to come by default. And here you want to choose a particular resource group, rather a container that you are going to be housing our static web application into. So I'm just going to choose one of the resource groups that I created earlier on. So having selected that, I'll give it a name. I'll just call it probably my site. And then when it comes to the hosting plan, I would recommend you to go with the free one for hobby or personal projects. since this one is a little bit non-commercial. It is actually non-commercial, so I would go with the free one for hobby and personal projects. But if you have an application that maybe you want to be referring your customers to another particular service, so you would choose this plan type called standard, which is for general purpose production apps. So moving along, you also get a section for the region for your Azure functions and APIs. So here I'm just going to choose a location that is next to me. Since here, since static web applications are only available for 5 regions, so I'm just going to select one of that. And then the deployment details. Now, essentially, this is the section I was talking about. In other words, this is the section that I was emphasizing. Do you want to grab your source code from GitHub? Do you want to grab your source code from Azure DevOps? So you literally get a chance to, choose any integration that you want to. If you're not working with GitHub, you can select other integration. So that could be Git bucket or any other Git provider. But here I'm just going to go with GitHub. Essentially, we are also going to be looking at Azure DevOps in details in some of the upcoming study sessions. But essentially, I'm just going to go with GitHub as my Git provider. And here it asks for the GitHub account. And this is my GitHub alias, rather my GitHub handle. So it just comes automatically. But before that, if you've just started with static web applications, you won't be having a search feature. So you would go ahead and click GitHub, and it will prompt you to sign into your GitHub account. So just going to move along. I'll choose my organization. Of course, this is Anton Biansi, my GitHub handle, and then I'll choose a particular repository. And one other thing I want to maybe stretch out is the repository that you may be having. Essentially, you might be having public repositories. You might as well have private repositories. So the static web application sort of help you to deploy either private or public repositories. So here I'm just going to choose which one can I go with? Oh, let me just choose one of my repositories, this one here, C4 Diagram Library Management System. And I want to the branch, basically the branch, you only choose the branch that you want to deploy. You might as well have multiple branches. So this section here gives you that capability to choose a particular branch that you want to deploy your static web application from. But since I'm having only one branch, which is the main, I'm just going to leave that. And then the presets, If you're working with Angular, Blazor, Next.js, React, you literally choose that framework that you're using. If you're not using any framework, or maybe you're using a static set generator, that could be Gatsby, Hugo, ViewPress, any static set generator that you may be working with. You may as well choose custom. But here I'm just going to choose HTML, and I'm just going to choose reselect, because I've realized in this repository I don't have any HTML file. So I'm just going to select another one, which is I'm figuring out which one I can choose. The one that I have basic HTML that probably I can deploy. I'm just going to navigate through. I don't know which one I can deploy. All right, let me just move on with this one. Oops, that would not make sense. Okay, let me just choose this one, Bugshark website. Since I have HTML in that, that is fine. The application basically gives you, here you basically specify a location for your allocation for your application. By slash, I mean that it is actually the current directory for this Bugshark website. So I'm just going to leave that, the output location, just leave that by default. Preview the workflow file. If you want to, you can preview that, but I'm just going to click next. Just like some of the study sessions that we've been holding, we've been looking at the tags section. And tags basically help you to define those key value pair sort of namespaces. And the key value pairs help you to communicate with the rest of the Azure services. So suppose you want to have your static web application to communicate with a service outside this static web application. So you would essentially go ahead and define a few tags here, and those are going to be used to communicate with the rest of the Azure static web apps. So I'm just going to leave that by default. I don't want the tags right now. So I'm just going to move to another section, review and create. So you realize that it is running a deployment workflow. Oops, not yet. I'm just going to click on create. So having made sure that my details are okay, you realize that it is running a deployment process within the background. It is, in other words, serving my web application. Oh, today it has been fast. I love that. So I'm just going to click on go to resource. You either click on this or this, so I can utilize any of that. So this is my site that has been deployed, and this workflow menu, this side on your left, basically gives you an overview of things that you can play around. with your site. So I'm just going to click on this URL, and it is going to take me to that particular site that I've already deployed. However, before that, let's click on the GitHub Actions run, GitHub Action runs, to basically visualize how our actions are running. So realize that before we accessed this, it was running in the background. So here it basically tells you that in other words, it has been a continuous integration workflow, right? We've integrated our changes into this Bugshark website. I don't know if that makes sense, but by continuous integration and continuous deployment, you kind of get that sort of continuous continuous changes being deployed within your main repository. So having done that, having clicked on the GitHub runs, here you need to be sending your GitHub account to have that sort of automatic integration with your Azure account. So don't forget that you need to authorize your account, your GitHub account with your Azure portal. So having accessed our GitHub actions, but before that, please, if you're not familiar with anything, just let me know so that probably I can rectify on that. So our Azure Static Web Application continuous integration ran for 3 minutes, I think. Yeah, sorry, 1 minute and 7 seconds. So I'm just going to access that particular website that has been deployed. So I'm just going to click on that URL. It is actually looking a little bit ugly since it is just basic HTML and a little bit of CSS. But basically, this gives you an overview of how you can deploy your web application to Azure. You realize that the URL that has been given to you, it is a little bit jumbled. In other words, it's a bit unfriendly to the user. The user will be accessing the URL. So essentially, when you want to change this to a particular URL, a nice looking URL, you can work with those, should I call them domain providers? You can correct me on that if I'm not correct. But essentially, it gives you this URL, and if you want to change this, you can request for a particular domain, maybe from GoDaddy or any other domain provider. Azure also has that service, but we are not going to look at that right now. Probably that could be another study session. So for the web application, like I said, it gives you this left workflow menu that you can probably explore. The access control. I remember we looked at this earlier on in one of our study sessions. The access control, identity as a service, identity as a as a service within Azure. So here you can define role assignments if you're having back-end developers within within your organization, rather within your team. You can define, you can basically go ahead and define those role assignments to different groups of your teams. You can also define several roles. Since here I'm working, I'm in a particular organization that is for students ambassadors. That's why you're seeing particular roles here. Owner basically right. The owner role basically gives you that sort of integration whereby the user that you're going to be assigning this role to can make any change within this site that you've already deployed. The contributor just making a little bit of changes, and you would want to utilize this one if you're an administrator for your organization. So you would want to utilize this to cordially invite several contributors to your application. So those could be back-end developers, front-end developers. Think of any contributor that you would come up with within your organization. You wouldn't obviously want to have that person as an owner, because we might have some sensitive data within an organization. So if you are saying that person the owner role, it might go ahead and make a few undesirable changes that you may actually regret. Also deny assignments. You can explore that. This is basically for your site, for my site that I've deployed. So you can go ahead and add role assignments, add a core administrator. You get the idea. The tags, like I said, basically for communicating with the rest of the Azure resources or Azure services. Diagnosing and solving problems. If your site is running down, you're questioning yourself where the problem is coming from. So you can go ahead and explore that from the diagnose and solve problem section. The application insights basically gives you an overview of where your application is running from, what traffic is it receiving, and probably where that traffic is coming from, so that literally you can make desirable decisions for your organization. Custom domains. Oh, now this is nice. Like I said, if you don't want this one, which is a little bit awful, as you can see here, this particular URL is a little bit user unfriendly. So if you don't want that, you can literally go ahead and add custom domains. You can go ahead and use custom domains on Azure DNS or any other domain that you would want to come up with. Like I said, that would be like GoDaddy, Namecheap, any domain provider that you can think of. You can go ahead and use that. But for now, since I don't want to go deep in deep detail with Azure DNS. I'm just going to leave that and move on to another section. Yeah, but make sure to type in the chat if you would wish to explore more on the Azure DNS, where you basically configure your custom domain for your application, not just having this randomly generated URL. Moving along to the next section, the APIs. I believe you guys know how to come up with these APIs, where essentially it helps you to communicate with other services, not only in Azure, but you can communicate with external services out of your applications. So I'm just going to leave that. If you want a study session on that, just let me know. Anything that you want to get clarification on, just let me know. The database connection, suppose your application is running on a particular database, you would go ahead and configure these settings. If your database is already existing, you can utilize that. In other words, it's in projection. You would go ahead and explore the rest of the services, the environments. This is the production environments by application. You would explore that as well. Well, the role assignment, you would go ahead and probably invite a few colleagues, and this role assignment basically works in hand in hand with the access control, right? So you would go ahead and explore that. The logs, private endpoints, all that. You would explore that. For now, I'm just going to go back to the overview section. So essentially that gives us an overview on how we can get started with applications within Azure. One other thing maybe I would want to stretch out is this dashboard here, down here. The request basically gives you that sort of visualization to look at the incoming requests for your application, and the data out. If someone is trying to click on several things within your application, so that basically gives you this sort of visualization that you would explore. So suppose I access this website on another tab. I make a few changes, click, and then go back to my portal. Refresh this section. Yeah, it has refreshed. So I don't know why it is not changing. Probably we can look at that later on. So essentially, that gives us an overview on how we can get started with the Azure static web apps. Not only static web applications, but you can literally explore Azure other types of web apps within Azure. So suppose you want to come up with a personal portfolio or any other sort of static application. So you can utilize this service. So moving back to the slide deck. Let me stop sharing the screen. Right. So moving along, we want to look at the introduction to containerization and probably some of its benefits for application development. Of course, here we are looking at something trivial, but suppose you're working in an organization and you want to spin up a lot of services for your application. So you would utilize something like containerization. So by containerization, I mean that sort of technology that helps you to package an application and all its dependencies together in some sort of a container, and then have that deployed in a cloud provider that you want. So we basically have containerization platforms that we would utilize, like Docker, Containerd, any other that you've ever had before. So you would go ahead and develop your application in that container runtime, and then have that deployed in a cloud provider that you're familiar with. Of course, here we are utilizing Azure, so I would recommend you to use Azure. So the some of the benefits for containerization, you have consistency, where it eliminates that sort of workflow where you get to question yourself, oh, it works on my machine. How about my colleague? It is not running, right? So that containerization workflow helps you to have that sort of consistency where you can literally run your application on any platform, be it Windows, be it Linux, any sort of operating system that you've ever come across. So you also get that sort of portability, whereby the applications that you're going to be bundling are a little bit portable. That means you can literally serve them in a Git provider, and probably have them shared with your team. The other thing would be isolation, and that provides a process level isolation for your applications, right? So you're not going to be developing for Windows only, but you can go ahead and develop for Linux and any other operating system. Don't ask me about Mac. I don't use Mac. It is actually one of my hardest operating systems that I've ever counted. All right, with that out of the way, we want to look at the overview of Docker. I'm not going to go into detail about Docker, but I'm going to be giving you a particular repository that you can look at to basically familiarize yourself with Docker. There are also tons of modules that you can look through within that GitHub repository. But here we want to basically look at the overview of Docker. Like I said, Docker is a platform that simplifies creation, deployment, and then management of container. And like I said, when you're working with colleagues within your development life cycle, you would package your application with all your dependencies, with its dependencies into some sort of a container. And with that, it helps you to literally um, literally not conflict, literally have that sort of development environment where you're not conflicting with the host operating system, right? So the key concepts to do with Docker, you have an image. By image, I mean that sort of immutable template that lets you define the application and all its dependencies and probably the runtime. The containers are just instances of your images that run your applications. And then lastly, we have the Docker file. So the Docker file is like a DNA that basically describes the individual steps for building your image, the image for your application. The very first step for your Docker file would be defining a base image for your application. And that script basically, like I told you, defines steps on how to create your image and with all its dependencies. So moving along, we want to look at Kubernetes as a powerful orchestration platform. I want to stretch out this. Azure also has an integration for Kubernetes. So if you want to deploy multiple containers within the cloud, Azure also has that service already provided. But when it comes to Kubernetes, most of the people abbreviate it with K8 K8s. I don't know if that is right according to my pronunciation. But Kubernetes, it is basically a container orchestration platform that helps you to automate the deployment, scaling, and management of your containerized applications. So suppose you want to spin up a lot of containers for your applications. So Kubernetes helps you to basically automate that sort of deployment. You can also scale your applications and have other management workflows within within Kubernetes. If you want another study session in deep detail about Kubernetes, let me know as well so that we can organize that. But essentially, when it comes to Kubernetes, you have a few concepts that you can look at. We have first things first, the pods. The pods is, you can think of it as the smallest deployable unit within Kubernetes. And it essentially has several containers within it. We also have a service as one of the key concepts for Kubernetes. And think of it as a networking abstraction that exposes pods to a network, right? We also have replica sets that essentially ensures a specified number of replicas for a pod that you're running. Suppose you want your application to run in South Africa North and also South Africa South Africa East, any kind of region that is available within Azure. So you get a chance to utilize those replica sets so that when you're to encounter downtime failures, you get a chance to sort of your application to be, in other words, your application to be depending on another region, not only the region that you've specified earlier on. The deployment manages the deployment and scaling of pods. Like I said, if you're working on an application and that application is basically bringing in a lot of traffic, so you would go ahead and scale pods for your application to basically handle that traffic that is coming in. So I'm just going to stop sharing a little bit and then dive back into the Azure portal so that we can move along with the demonstration. I want to share a window. That is my site. Perfect. Hope all of you can see my screen. So I'm just going to navigate back to my home and I want to access something. I want to access the container service within Azure. So I'll just type in Azure Kubernetes. You realize that it is one of the first results. The results that it comes that comes along with your search results. So I'm just going to click on Azure Kubernetes service. So here I want to create one of my Kubernetes service within Azure. So I'm just going to click on create. Like any other service within Azure, you simply want to have that housed within a particular resource group. So I'm just going to choose that AZU104 resource group. The standard Here I would recommend you to move along with the standard one, which is the default one, but you can go ahead and explore other cluster details. Probably one other thing I didn't talk about Kubernetes is a cluster. A cluster is essentially um, that's sort of a container where you have multiple nodes. By nodes within Kubernetes, I mean those individual virtual machines. All right. By nodes, I mean those individual virtual machines on which you're running your application on. So the cluster details, by cluster rather, I mean that's sort of a container that has multiple nodes for where your application is running on, right? Oh, like I said in one of the study sessions that we held earlier on, which was all about creating a virtual machine. So you may be having your application that maybe runs on multiple virtual machine. So those virtual machines may be called nodes, right? So you can grab those nodes and then have some sort of a cluster, right? I think that makes a bit of sense. So you would go ahead and define your cluster name. Just going to call this simple as that. Just demo for demonstration. The region, you would go with the region that is closest to you. Of course, South Africa North is the closest region to us. The availability zones, remember we have been looked at this in our very first study session. Then the Kubernetes service pricing tier, I would recommend you to go with the free one, which has the cluster management for less than fewer than 10 nodes. Then the rest of the details, I'm just going to leave them by default. This basically defines the Kubernetes version. We have several versions that we can work with. Then just leave the rest of the things to default. Maybe probably one other thing talk about is so realize that the maximum node count you have selected is you have selected is higher than the remaining quota for the subscription. So realize that having selected the oops, I think that is okay. So according to my subscription, I think I would go with only one node count for this particular cluster. So I'm just going to leave the rest of the details and review and create. We haven't moved through these details, but essentially you would go ahead and explore some of them, the networking bit of that, integrations with other Azure services, the advanced, the tags for basically communicating with the rest of the Azure services, access, which people within your organization would you want to have access to this Kubernetes cluster, right? You also define the node pools. Yeah, my validation test has been passed, so I can go ahead and create this Kubernetes cluster. I'll go ahead and create. It is initializing the deployment in the background. That is fine. Well, the deployment is taking a little bit longer. But just within a couple of minutes, the deployment would have gotten done. But as the deployment runs in the background, you realize that it is generating some of the deployment details by continuously. So blah blah blah. Sorry about the silence. I've just received an email which got me distracted. Just waiting for the deployment to get done, then we move along. So the email that I've just received is to do with this Azure Kubernetes cluster that I've deployed. And essentially, when you create some of these resources, you get a notification via your email to basically monitor your resources. And essentially, in one of the emails that I've just received, it has a subscription ID, the resource group, under which I've just deployed my Azure Kubernetes cluster, and a few other details to basically have that sort of monitoring workflow. Well, the deployment is taking a little bit longer, but just to be patient. Maybe probably as we wait for the deployment to run in the background. If you have any question, please utilize the chat. Let me know where you need more clarification so that I could provide that. Waiting for the deployment. And maybe one other thing as to why the deployment sometimes takes long, because some of these resources are a little bit computational intensive. In other words, they overconsume a lot of resources for computational resources. So the deployment, that's why the deployment takes a little bit longer. Yeah, the deployment is still running in the background. I just want us to explore some of the things that come along after you having created that Kubernetes cluster. Let me know anything that you would want to get clarification on by utilizing the chat. I'm also going to be sharing the links to some of these individual study sessions that are available on Microsoft Learn website, so that you can go ahead and explore a few concepts to do with Azure Kubernetes. Right. So just going to refresh. All right, perfect. Interesting. So the deployment is complete. I can go ahead and click go to resource. So this is my Kubernetes cluster that I've just created under the Kubernetes service. So on your left, you realize that you have a few sections that you would explore, like just like some of the services that we've been playing around with. You get access to access control management, where you want to basically give access to particular individuals for this service. The activity log gives you that overview on how you can basically explore some of the logs that have been generated by your Kubernetes cluster. I'm not going to go much detail into the rest of the things. Maybe the other one would be GitOps, GitHub operations. Suppose you want to have that sort of integration with your GitHub workflows. You can go ahead and integrate in those GitHub configurations. Namespaces, basically creating all other nodes. Yeah, so having created that Kubernetes cluster, you would go ahead and connect to external, external services. You first of all set up the cluster subscription. You would also download the credentials, the cluster credentials file, or basically copy that. The Kubernetes, the kubectl files for deploying your resources within Azure. You can go ahead and also utilize that. I'm just going to close that and move back to that. Creating your configurations file. That would be written in YAML or any other configuration script that you're familiar with. So let me know if you need individual demo on how you can probably get started with Azure Kubernetes. So that has been brief. If you have any question, please go ahead and ask before I end the call. I'm going to be sharing the screen. Sorry, I'm going to be sharing the slides, and I'm also going to be updating